If you want to get the show early and ad-free, head on over to the Quinones.com. There you can choose from where you wish to support me. Now listen very carefully. I've had some people ask me about this, even though I think on the last ad I stated it pretty clearly. If you want an RSS feed, you're going to have to subscribe through Substack or through Patreon. You can also subscribe on my website, which is right there, Gumroad, and what's the other one? Subscribestar. And if you do that, you will get access to the audio file. So head on over to thepequinoneshow.com. You'll see all the ways that you can support me there. And I just want to thank everyone. It's because of you that I can put out the amount of material that I do. I can do what I'm doing with Dr. Johnson on 200 Years Together and everything else, the things that Thomas and I are doing together on continental philosophy. It's all because of you. And yeah, I mean, I'll never be able to thank you enough. So thank you. ThePequinonesShow.com. Everything's there. I want to welcome everyone back to the Quinones Show. Karl Dahl is back with a new subject. No Spanish Civil War this time. We're not going to the Orient. We're going to actually a country I lived in for a little while. How you doing, Karl?
Doing great, Pete. Glad to be here.
I mean, I know that this is going to be a lot of information, so just run with it, man, and I'll jump in.
You got it. I have one slight correction: is that there is a Spanish Civil War tie-in in this story, but
of course, yeah,
all the way at the very end.
Yeah, you sort of have to. Thomas and I recorded with Adam from Myth of the 20th Century the other day. They're doing the review of the World at War series from BBC, I think, of the 70s, and they didn't. I think they've glossed over the Spanish Civil War, and we covered it. I went on and we covered some of it, and of course, Thomas did the tie-in with two Romanian gentlemen in the Spanish Civil War. So
absolutely,
yep.
Right on. All right, well, I'll dive right into it then. So the subject of this episode is the Legion of the Archangel Michael, aka the Iron Guard, organization out of Romania in the interwar period. And I think, Pete, I'll start with my usual preface that this is not a Fed post, but I will say that there are many concepts within Codreanu's kind of conceptual framework and organizational structure that are, I think, very important. I also think that the Legion or the Iron Guard, whatever terminology you want to use, became something different after Codreanu died. It was different versus the what was taking place, frankly, through the sheer force of his personality. So let's dive into it. So I have a little agenda here. I'm going to start out with my sources. I'll provide a history in brief of Romania, plus the topic of Romania and anti-Semitism, because it's really important to understand what we're talking about here. We'll talk about the captain, Cornelio Zelea Codreanu, and kind of an overview of him and some of his life experience. We'll then talk about the political scene in Romania in and around this topic. In fact, that's like a consistent theme throughout everything. One of the key folks in that is A.C. Cuza, who represents kind of the more like the establishment conservative angle, although he was an early ally of Codreanu.
Oh, and go find some of A.C. Cuza's more famous writings.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that we'll hit on here. Is when there's a work, we're going to definitely recommend that you read it. Yes. I will also point out, though, to that end, there's a great deal of material that is not easy to get from Romania, but a lot of it is still seemingly available in Romania, whether it's online or not. This is not this is not something that they're shy about. In fact, there's a pretty notable remaining legacy in Romania. And then we'll kind of close out with the timeline of the Iron Guard / Legion of Archangel Michael until the very bitter end. So let's get going. My sources, one of the primaries is For My Legionaries, which is a fantastic book by the captain himself, Corneliu Zelea Codreanu. I highly recommend that everyone read it. It's available online. I would say that the translation is pretty good in every version I've seen. I've only read 2 or 3 versions that are my suspicion is that they're just repackagings of the same translation. But there are some others that may be slightly better. And there's some things, and I mention that because there's some artifacts that stand out to me as being like these very minor inaccuracies, but would be an easy mistake to make from kind of translations of that era. Like one of them being obviously referring to an automatic pistol and using the term revolver. That's an incredibly common error in the interwar period for some reason in the translations into English. The next is the organizational documentation that we still have, which is the Nest Leaders Manual, which refers to a kind of a leadership position within the Iron Guard or the Legion of the Archangel Michael. And then also referring to a great article by Stanley Payne, of course, the great Stanley Payne, the expert on this stuff, who you should go to if there's any material on a topic and Stanley Payne wades in on it. You need to read Professor Payne's works. So I'm referring to his material on the Iron Guard and the Romanian political scene from A History of Fascism, 1914 to 1945.
Not to try to call Professor Payne out or get him in trouble, but would you say he is sympathetic or is he just honest?
He's neutral. He's honest.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, you'll see in this article, like he does a little bit of the stuff that tells you he's not being sympathetic, or how would I put it? He's sympathetic to humanity, and he believes in the truth, and he's just utterly transparent, and he speaks from a position of reality and knowledge and detachment. So he's not performative in his denouncements or anything like that. So okay. Very, very helpful, very important. And then finally, a Julius Evola piece, The Tragedy of the Romanian Iron Guard, Codreanu. Highly recommend that you read this. This is available online also.
I've meant to read that on the show, and I just haven't had a chance to.
Yeah. And it's a perfect way to describe it because I see it as a tragedy in many ways also.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that. Again, I just want to advertise For My Legionaries. It details his activism, his philosophy, his motivation, and his goals. It's interspersed with a lot of Romanian history, statistical support for what he's talking about, and I believe it is the most inspiring and actionable interwar memoir that's out there. I don't have the copy with this lovely cover here with the Carrie Bolton introduction. My suspicion is that it is based on what I've read online. It seems to corroborate my suspicion that it is a slightly better translation than the old one. And just, it's a comfy book that you can sit and read in your chair. So I feel comfortable recommending it. So Codreanu is very famous for this first quote that we have here. And I just want to read a couple of these inspirational quotes because it tells you how serious this guy was and how realistic he was, as well as his mindset, which I think in many ways, not always, but in many ways does translate to things that we should keep in mind in our own lives based on where we're at. So the first and fiercest punishment ought to fall on the traitor, second on the enemy. If I had but one bullet and I were faced by both an enemy and a traitor, I would let the traitor have it. And this is a position that he comes to. This is a quote from For My Legionaries because of the issues that they have with traitors of all kinds. And it's very important to understand that you have, in Codreanu's framing, you have traitors, you have adversaries, and you have enemies. And the adversary is treating you as their enemy, but you're not really enemies. It's something that'll constantly come up. Conservatives. Second, we have first seized the front line of trenches, then the second and the third, and our adversary, shut up in his retreat, in the safety which it offers, is now firing at us, not knowing that we would like nothing better than to come to his aid against the real enemy. And then finally, I see the true destiny of our people as lying not in time, but in eternity. Political achievements, culture, struggles, and national greatness are means, not ends in themselves. The ultimate goal is not life, but resurrection. He's often referred to as a mystic, and I believe that's from the perspective of materialists who just don't understand because they're bugmen. So to understand this story, we need to do a little bit of Romanian history, and as briefly as possible, because it looms large in this talk. So the first thing I want to say is that the Romanian principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia were founded in the 14th century. There's a lot of debate over whether an ancient, like, Dacian or Daco-Roman population survived in the kind of intervening 12, 11 centuries from when this was Roman territory or not, because of all the migrations that took place. There's a huge amount of debate there. Or did some later migrate, and then, because this is a dark age period where there's just very little remaining evidence other than legends, right? And legends can be created in retrospect. So Romanians often claim descent from Romanized, then Christianized. I think Dacians is the term, Thracians, or the Getae. Romania was squeezed between the Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, and Russian empires. And so as this kind of distinct population with a distinct language, of course, it's extremely important to dig in and focus on what your heritage is. But this is one of those things we literally just don't know, but Romanian patriots will certainly make reference to their ancient claim to the land, which is fine by me. Under the Ottoman Empire, these principalities became unified and recognized as Romanian unified principalities, not semi-autonomous, but more like responsible for their own government as the Ottoman Empire was deteriorating in 1862. And then formally became the Kingdom of Romania, those principalities, in 1881. The Old Kingdom, which was within that small footprint, survived until 1914 and then expanded beginning in 1914 through, frankly, 1947, before it became totally reorganized under the Soviets. So, in brief, it's really important to understand the context right before the interwar period. So, the Kingdom of Romania entered the Second Balkan War, which, if you remember your World War I history, predated World War I proper. They were fighting against the Tsardom of Bulgaria, and part of it was to try to claim some territory that they felt was theirs, and a lot of it, there was a substantial Romanian population in Bulgaria, in these little corners of Bulgaria. So in 1916, as this war is ongoing, Romania enters on the Entente side, so like France, Russia. Romanian forces did not fare well militarily, but by the end of the war, the Austrian and Russian empires were gone. So everything's getting carved up. We know that there were major changes in borders after World War I, just as these treaties were being laid out. So Transylvania, Bessarabia, and Bukovina voted on union with Romania because they had pluralities, if not full majorities, of ethnic Romanians within their territory. So this was formalized along with some other territorial gains in 1919 by the Treaty of Saint-Germain, and in 1920 by the Treaty of Trianon. And then, as in neighboring countries, the earliest 20th century saw leftist terrorism and uprisings, including in Romania, the Soviet-backed Tartar-Bunary uprising in the 1920s. So there's this massive pressure of these changes in the borders and, war and combat and movements of peoples. So a little bit of context about the Romanian political scene at the time, because this is really important, but we're not going to beat it to death. So executive power resided in the king, and he delegated his power to the Council of Ministers, who he appointed to basically run things for him. The legislative power was entrusted to both Parliament and the king, so that the king could, depending on his level of power at a given time, could come in and shut things down. So there was a bicameral parliament. There was a Senate, which was elected by electoral bodies, so basically elites being selected. And then the Assembly of Deputies was elected by the populace. There was really limited suffrage, however, before a 1923 Constitution of the Union, which granted universal male suffrage. And most importantly, regardless of religion or origin.
Oh, that's going to come to bite them in the ass.
It absolutely does. So as all these different peoples are being settled and they're figuring out who's in their territory, and again, you can't really go back and be like, wait, were you here before 1914 or 1918 or 1919 or 1920? There's not really a way to do that. It's literally everyone has it and you're here and you're a citizen. Not the most wonderful idea. What is going on? Okay, so previously, before the interwar period, I should say, Romania's parliament consisted of two parties. There was a conservative and a national liberal party. So the national liberal hints at that they're nationalists, but they're pretty liberal. And I'll point that out because there was a big, very strong anti-communist movement in Romania, and a lot of that was because, frankly, in Romania, communism was vast majority Jewish, just like right over the border in the Russian Empire. So during the Great War, the majority of Romanian conscripts had been landless peasants that were marginalized by what was called census suffrage. So, like I said, there was limited suffrage, and it, really kind of what your standing in the census and what you owned, etc., like could dictate how much skin in the game that you had. And so there was this huge swell, and there had been revolts in 1907 called the Peasants' Revolt, and all these uprisings. The government of Romania was very unpopular because they were not doing well as a country. They had oil wealth, but it wasn't going down below the elites. So as this universal suffrage is granted, tons of political parties pop up, and nationalist populist political movements exploded in popularity, from the Peasants' Party to the People's Party. And really, this is my summary, is that the key foci that determine their alignments within kind of this landscape were positions on land reform, whether they were explicitly anti-Semitic or not, their position on anti-communism, and then the relationships with non-Romanian ethnics, which we'll get into here in a second.
When you say non-Romanian ethnics, you're talking about diasporas within Romania?
Whether they're diaspora or they're the settlers, like German settlers, okay, or the Hungarians in Transylvania. So okay, I'll dive into that in more detail here very shortly.
No problem.
So to understand Romanian anti-Semitism, you have to see 200 years together. And I say that because Pete has a wonderful series that he's doing with Dr. Johnson on this, and it's the same stuff. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same stories. So that was not something that the Romanians believed. But it's the same story, and we'll dive right into it. So it's, if you read like conventional histories of it, like if you go to the Wikipedia talking about this, it's all libtards and like Yad Vashem articles. Okay. So but the truth is that this anti-Semitism was not xenophobia or chauvinism. So this territory, which had been under the Turks, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire, etc., had long been multi-ethnic, and there were distinct legal codes and semi-autonomous government for these individual groups. So the Jews had a very small population that was allowed. There were expulsions in Romanian history. The Jewish communities governed themselves under the Kahal, which we'll look at here in a second, and some stuff that Codreanu talks about regarding the Kahal, which also is a reference back to 200 years together. So an example of this is that German settlers were brought in over hundreds of years to kind of fortify those borderlands against the Ottomans and or develop these lands in Transylvania, Regat, Budjak, and along the Danube River basin. So there were very important, respected German populations all over the place. Their position changes a little bit given the kind of geostrategic things going down in the 20th century, the rise of Germany. But at the same time, these are people who are recognized as being like Christians and honest. They have their own interests that aren't necessarily other people's, but like literally Codreanu never once slanders Germans or Hungarians. He talks about some of the political challenges that they're having over ownership of these territories and domination, but that's different. So when you read these Wikipedia articles, they say, oh, well, a lot of this, Romanian nationalism was just chauvinism from all these people that were coming in, and they were just different and they didn't know how to deal with it. That's nonsense. Here's the other thing. The Jewish population in Romania exploded in the 19th century. So after the 1829 Treaty of Adrianople, which was basically wrapped up the Ottoman-Russian wars, there were all these, of course, there were all these trade and travel rules that were imposed, which were to, it's that whole libertarian concept that if goods don't cross borders, tanks will. So that was the theory, which meant that there was a flood of Jews from the Russian Empire and probably other parts of the Ottoman Empire into Romania, which was this crossroads and thus very important for trade. So by the year 1900, they go from like an almost non-existent population that are, in their shtetls and, having these, they're important with commerce and lending money and stuff, but they're not that powerful, to just utterly dominating the economy, the press, the schools, and the political parties. And then at the conclusion of World War I, as all these borders are being redrawn, the Jewish population basically doubles in Romanian territory, mostly up in kind of the northeastern part of the country, which is hard against Ukraine, which is bananas. So here's a table, and because we're going to get into educational militancy, or at least this massive uprising of nationalistic agitation in the school system and the university system. And percentiles would have been handy here, but the long and the short of it is, in a lot of the key universities, the Romanians came back from war and found that they were totally outnumbered in many of the schools in university, the School of Pharmacy.
This is 1905. This is the Russo-Japanese War.
100%, man. 100%. So they're totally outnumbered. And then because of that, these schools are basically being run by non-Christians, and you're studying law, and law is like about morality. It's not about, charts and graphs. And here are these people telling you that it's about charts and graphs. So you can see that in the University of Iași, there was a huge Romanian student body in the School of Law, for example. But they weren't used to this situation where they're these huge populations, or they're like totally outnumbered in the School of Medicine, etc. If you look up at the very top and you see what the actual attendance in these other schools is that, like, in the rural areas, there's almost no Jews. And that's frankly because of policy, that they were excluded from being able to live in the countryside as much as possible, for the same reasons, there were such edicts made in the Russian Empire. And then when you look at the urban schools, again, like on paper, you'd think that they wouldn't, it just doesn't translate to these tiny percentiles, but dominating these universities. Let's look at a more general population breakout from a 1930 survey. And this is where they find out what the real numbers are. So in the 20s, Codreanu had stated that he believed that the Jewish population was being reported as one half of what it was, because the numbers were based on pre-World War I projections, and they found that they were right. So in Bukovina, it was 30% Jewish. Bessarabia, 26.8%. Moldavia, 23.1%. I mean, and it goes all over. And so the cities were very, very much dominated by Jews, again, as these people come back from World War I and the lines are being redrawn. And so that's going to leave people miffed. It's not like these are people that they've been living with for hundreds of years. It's this massive surge of this population that came from just across the border, frankly. And so, and also, it blockade. When you read Blockade, there's this
Yes.
mysterious thing where the Soviets are sending these populations to raid on the borders. Codreanu talks about the same thing taking place, whether it's raiding or whether it's just repopulating people. Just this constant flow of people from these Soviet areas and spreading a communist message, which, to their credit, the Romanian government was suppressing quite thoroughly. So Codreanu asserts, and again, the way that For My Legionaries is written, he does a weave. He does a very a Trumpian weave, in that he will be talking about this is what's going on right now, and then he'll step back and he'll write about history and provide a bunch of statistics, and then he'll provide some philosophical stuff, his positions on certain things. And so as he's telling this story about like what they're seeing in these university cities and what the struggles that are taking place, he intersperses, hey, there are these people that are saying, well, just retreat to the rural areas. This is a common refrain in the United States. Just give up these things, give up the universities, give up the towns, give up the cities. And Codreanu points out the towns and cities are the economic centers of a nation. And a population reproduces and develops within its means, based on how the economy is treating them. Towns are also the cultural centers of the nation, as they contain the schools, libraries, theaters, lecture halls. So that's where culture is expressed and how it is spread. And then finally, the towns are the political centers of a nation. Nations follow the lead of the towns. Whoever controls the towns directly or indirectly has the political leadership of the country. So he says you can't hand these places over to your enemies or they will take your country over. I think he's right. Maybe the right place for certain people is in a small town. But if you give up these centers of power, you're literally just handing them over to your enemy.
Well, it's also kind of hard when your enemy already has complete control of it. Then I'd really like to give me the explanation of how you get it back.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. Codreanu's position is that you fight by all means, legal or otherwise. And
good luck in the United States. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think it's pretty fair to say that like he's correct in the meta, but tactically all considerations are different. Absolutely.
He's 100% correct when it comes to. I mean, he's it's like the libertarians. Sure, they can diagnose a problem, solve it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think what Codreanu also his position would be that stick to the places where the Romanians are the majority, and if the Romanians are an extreme minority, like don't worry about it. So we'll look at that here in a second. So the Kahal, and I just wanted to point this out because this is something that you read in 200 Years Together, a great deal of talk about the Kahal, which supposedly had basically gone away at some point in the 18th or 19th century. But Codreanu asserts that this exact same system is taking place. It exists in Romania. And he says, in every city or market town where a number of Jews settle, the Kahal, the Jewish community there, its leadership really is immediately formed. This Kahal has its own leaders, separate judicial setup, taxes, etc., and holds the entire Jewish population of that locality tightly united around itself. It is here in this tiny Kahal of the market town or city that all plans are made. How to win over local politicians and authorities, how to infiltrate certain circles of interest to them, such as magistrates, officers, high officials, what plans to use to take over such and such branch of commerce from the hands of a Romanian, how to destroy a local anti-Semite, how to destroy an incorruptible representative of local authority who might oppose Jewish interests. what plans to apply when, squeezed beyond endurance, the population would revolt and erupt into anti-Semitic movements. So this is from his section, The Plans of Judaism Against the Romanian Nation, which he had written based on, frankly, court records. We'll get into it here in a second, but he was a lawyer. So he goes into great detail here. We'll be here all day if I read all his thoughts. You really should just read For My Legionaries. So I'm just going to provide a provisional ethnic map before we dive into the characters to kind of wrap up this history and context section here. I found this online. It's a fantastic map from that 1930 census that was taken, that was done, that identifies like ethnicity by province, and it really shows how Romania acquired a lot of these territories that it found itself with after World War I, or partly into World War I. And some of them are kind of in question. You'll notice this big green spot in the middle. This is basically Transylvania. And there was a huge Hungarian settlement, and you'll see the Hungarians are all up here in the direction of Hungary from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the Hungarians were settled in Transylvania again as a blockade against the Ottomans in a lot of ways, or I should say they were reinforced because Hungarians had been there for a very long time. But there are also huge Romanian populations to the west surrounding them. So it's a sticky situation. You'll also notice up here in the borderland with Ukraine, there's a substantial Ukrainian population. There are German populations.
That's where I crossed over when I was there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And there's some Poles up here. There's even some Czechoslovaks and Serbs and Croats and Gypsies and Tatars over here, and Russians and Bulgarians. So it's a big mess. So even if you have a substantial Romanian population, you're dealing with a lot of kind of struggle for the the population and political power. So 28.1% as of 1920, 28.1% of the population was non-Romanian. Of those, so 7.9% of the population total were Hungarian, Magyars, 1.4 million. And then next is Germans, with almost half the population of the Magyars at 4.1%. Jews were a full 4% of the population minimum in 1920, growing to over 2 million by 1930. And then it filters down smaller portions after that. So very important context, because now it's time for us to talk about Corneliu, Zelea, Codreanu, and the Iron Guard and the political movement and machinations. So he was born in Husi, Western Moldavia, Romania, to nationalist politician Ion Zelea Codreanu. The interesting thing is Zelea had been Zelensky. His father was a Romanianized Slav. Some would say Ukrainian, or his family was from that background with some mixing. His mother was from those settler German populations. So kind of a hybridized Romanian, but a true believer nonetheless. He spent 5 years at the Dahl Military High School, which is within the Dahl Monastery, which is a very interesting place. It's the resting place of the head of Michael the Brave, who was a 16th century Romanian hero. So his teen years were religion, nationalism, and martyrdom. Like, those were the things being pumped into him. The tail end of that period is when World War I is happening. He tries to join his father, who goes off to war in 1918, and tags along as a volunteer and basically has to participate in like one operation or like kind of a holding and withdrawal type of situation. And so when that crisis ends, he's sent off for formal military training. He spends over a year there, and then the war ends. So he leaves from the military academy, frankly, because he was on track to be an officer, because of his background at the military high school, as was the style at the time. So he's sent to Yassy University in 1919 and immediately becomes active in nationalist politics. Yassy University had been the hub of Romanian nationalist politics at the time. When Codreanu gets there, he's incredibly disappointed in how leftist it had become, except for a core of hardcore right-wing nationalist professors. So while he's in Yassy, he participated in street protests and anti-communist action and so on, with an organization called the Guard of the National Conscience, which was a, quote, national Christian socialist street organization led by a famous union leader, Constantin Pancu, who was a very tough guy. He had been won like strongman competitions and like circus boxing matches where they would take on like all comers and stuff. Pretty wild stories. So there's great stories about the fights that they get into around that. And then he goes on to found the Christian Students Association in 1922 to combat what he described as non-Christian academic trends, and doing that through due process, agitating within the structure of the universities. Well, because of all this, he ends up being expelled by the university senate. His Codreanu's position is that this is because they're corrupt, and frankly, that seems to be the case. But he gets massive support while all this is going on. There's massive support from Romanians all over the country, as well as in the city, coming out to support them with these struggles against the university. So the faculty of law, because he was going to law school, refused to recognize the expulsion dictated by the university senate. He continues his studies, and he's issued a degree by the law school, although the university would not give him a formal diploma. So who is one of the fellows backing him in the law school? A.Z. Cuza, who is described as the father of expressly anti-Semitic Romanian nationalism, because of his own writings, as you mentioned, Pete. Very interesting stuff, very firebrand type material. He was a longtime professor at the University of Yassy. He launched the National Christian Union in 1922, which morphed into the National Christian Defense League in 1923, which Codreanu joined. He was a big wheel in nationalist politics because of his writing and so on. He called for, and this is really key, a gradual withdrawal of rights for Jews followed by an expulsion. He was doing the lawfully legal political angle. He was an old friend of Corneliu Codreanu's father, Ion. They were old friends and political allies. Like I pointed out, Ion was a politician from back in the day. So, very interestingly, there is an incident that takes place in 1923 or 1924. We'll look at it here in detail, where Codreanu defends himself against an abusive police chief, basically named Monsu, and the press says Mr. Cusa aimed and Codreanu fired. So he's being accused of supporting these street militants that are attached to his political movement. Ultimately, he and Codreanu formally split in 1927, although it's done amicably and respectfully. And Codreanu talks about the issues with Cusa's approach to things and why he doesn't want to follow them, but he's very respectful about him and talks about how important he was as a figure in identifying and communicating the issues actually faced by the country. Later on, Cusa was appointed a minister of state in 1937 in his short-lived Goga government. The 1930s, the governments are changing constantly because of King Karl II. We'll look at that more later. And then he ends up in King Karl II's Crown Council, 1939-1940. He was a big fan of the Windmill of Friendship and used it in his movement documentation and logos beginning in 1921. And is very interesting. So Codreanu says of Cusa in For My Legionaries, in recommending his work, he says, all these are impeccably treated by Professor A.C. Cusa in his writings, The Peoplehood, Nationality and Art articles, parliamentary discourses, and courses in political economy. The ideas that I give below belong essentially to Professor Cusa's thought. So he's constantly referring to him as a thought leader that influenced him. So in 1923, Codreanu and some of the other militant youth of the National Christian Defense League were placed in Vakaresti prison, which is a hellhole. From the descriptions, it's just, think of the worst prison conditions you've heard of in film or books, and that's Vakaresti prison and how these guys were treated. They were placed there in 1923 for conspiracy, but were acquitted because they did not meet the terms of an actual conspiracy according to Romanian law. And again, here's a couple of lawyers that you're putting in prison for conspiracy. They had volunteers to represent them, did a lot of their own speaking themselves, and basically Codreanu designed his own defense in many ways and was acquitted. They had more than 10,000 Romanians outside of the trial and just like a packed courtroom. And the position that Codreanu constantly finds himself in is that he appeals to people's patriotism and says everything that we're fighting for is out of faith and love for our country and the Romanian people. We assume the obligation to fight to the end, and just doesn't want to pretend that he's not, fighting the power, and is completely honest about it, but will also not state that he committed any kind of crime. So huge theme in his work. While in Vakaresti prison, Codreanu conceived of what becomes the Legion of the Archangel Michael, named after an icon of the Archangel Michael that was in the Vakaresti prison chapel that they would sit at and, while praying and meditating upon the icon. So very interestingly, some people are determined to not have participated in a conspiracy, somewhat surprisingly, including Ion Mota, who becomes very famous later, and they're freed from before the trial. And then during jury deliberation, Ion Mota goes into the courtroom and assassinates a traitor, Vernicescu, who had been one of their comrades who ratted them out to the government and claimed that they were engaged in a conspiracy. Jan Mota is given a jury trial and found not guilty or acquitted of charges by a jury, basically because the jury thought he was cool. And they were like, cool, you should do that to people who do that, which is wild. In 1924, while defending, so basically there was a Konstantin Manchu was a police prefect, so very powerful in the police in Yasi, and had been like the key guy who was cracking down on the nationalist agitators. And they'd been like holding students and torturing them and just beating them. And anytime that they tried to get together, they would attack them. Codreanu claims that at one point, Manchu, after beating them up at a rally, and they basically chained up the prisoners and paraded them through a Jewish quarter in Yasi, where, to show them that he was doing what they wanted in Codreanu's terms, where they were then heaped with abuse and assaulted and stuff like that, and then would just let them go after a couple days. Anyway, Codreanu was defending another National Christian Defense League member in court, again, because he's a lawyer at this point. And Manchu and a bunch of guys come and start attacking him while he's smoking a cigarette during a break, in the trial. Codreanu pulls his piece and blasts and turns himself in immediately, just sets his weapon down, lets himself get arrested. But then he's acquitted. And the position is that it was an act of self-defense. And so they could not, they did the whole what's the term, shopping around for a jurisdiction where he could be tried, where they would think they would find a favorable jury, and the jury there is like, nah, he's great, we think he's wonderful. Some of the jurors in that first conspiracy trial came in after, when they're reading the finding, and they have armbands with swastikas on them, and they're like, not guilty. Wild. So if you can't tell, there's massive upswelling of nationalism in Romania at this time, which is a huge challenge for the government, frankly. And the government interprets it as an attack on them, despite all these entreaties of the nationalists to work with the government. So anyway, after he's acquitted and some stuff happens, he's been engaged to Elena, who's there in this. This is a photo from right after their wedding. And their wedding is the major social event in all of Romania for that year, with 80 to 100,000 people who came out in attendance. And the story of them, walking from town to town to come to this for this wedding is just wild, with people coming out dressed in folk costumes, as you can see he's wearing here. And ornate carriages, and people are donating all kinds of stuff, and it's like this huge massive party, almost like a royal wedding. And it's filmed by a film crew and then shown in movie houses in Bucharest, and then the Ministry of Internal Affairs shuts it down and confiscates the film and destroys it, because of obviously what's happening here. So after his wedding and all this tension, and the fact that he's got away with yeeting a cop, he and his wife think, we should probably avail ourselves of some of our opportunities to go out of the country for a little while and continue my legal studies. So Codreanu and Jon Mota go to Grenoble, France, with Elena coming along, and basically live in abject poverty, but get to know like the locals and really liking like what they call the genuine French culture. You have to keep in mind that Romania had been for like at least 100 years total Francophiles, that especially in the elite circles, much like the Russians, right, Pete? Like France was like the center of the liberal modern world in Europe, for those kinds of people.
That's
And
where
so
so
Codreanu,
many of the
yeah,
Bolsheviks hid there, and
absolutely.
yeah.
And so Codreanu's observations about France are very interesting. But in general, he's like, we found the right people and we found good churches and so on. So after he completes his studies in Grenoble, but there's all kinds of things taking place politically in Romania that draw him back, including a great deal of oppression of the League of Christian National Defense. Codreanu returns and is moved to say, I don't want to participate in party politics because we're not in a position where we can be successful doing this, just because of the state of the nation and ourselves, which is really interesting. So he founds the Legion of the Archangel Michael out of with the root and the core leadership of it being the Brotherhood of the Cross, which was a youth subset of the League of Christian National Defense that they'd been working together for years and trusted each other. So very interestingly, one of their members said, there are defeats and deaths which can awaken a nation to life, just as there are triumphs of the kind which can put a nation to sleep. And so that was kind of their an expression of their motivation for creating this separate group, because they just felt like the issue that they had was any successes that they had would mute the energy of what they were doing, and then it would just, things would dissipate. And they didn't want to have a political platform or like a quote unquote program, to use the term that Codreanu uses. Codreanu says this country is dying of lack of men, not of lack of programs. And so his statement, his quote is, as a consequence of seeing this state of affairs, the political state of affairs, the cornerstone on which the Legion stands is man, not the political program. Man's reform, not that of the political programs. The Legion of the Archangel Michael will be, in other words, more a school and an army than a political party. He says in another quote, our intimate feelings from which the Legion was born were these. It did not interest us whether we would triumph or be conquered, or whether we would die. Our purpose was different, to advance, united, moving forward in a united front with the help of God and the Romanian people's justice, no matter what destiny awaited us, that of being vanquished or that of death. It would be a blessed one, and it would bear fruit for our people. So again, they realize that this political agitation, every victory, 2 steps back. So they step away and they try to kind of peacefully do their own thing for a while. We shall create an atmosphere, a moral medium in which the heroic man can be born and can grow. And it's based on 4 leading principles: faith in God, faith in their mission, love for each other, and then, interestingly, song as the chief manifestation of our state of mind. And this just resonates with me. They treat prayer as a decisive element for victory. One of their members, Mihail Polyhronidade, gosh, these names are killing me, said, fascism venerates the state, German National Socialism, the race and the nation. Our movement strives to fulfill the destiny of the Romanian people through salvation. So they want to be heroes. And the hero is a product of the legionary education. The hero will be able to know how to elaborate programs instead of focusing on predefining a program. They'll know how to organize the state. They will know how to convince the other Romanians. And if not, he will know how to win, for that is why he is a hero. And Codreanu said why they held up song as the chief manifestation of their state of mind. He says, to be able to sing, one has to be in a certain state of spirit and inner harmony. A person bent on robbing someone cannot sing, nor can one who is about to commit some other wrong, nor he whose soul is consumed by envy and hate of his comrade, nor he whose soul is devoid of faith. That is why you, legionaries of today and tomorrow, anytime you feel the need to orient yourselves in the legionary spirit, you must return to these 4 lines of our beginning, which constitute the basis of our movement. And the song will be a guide to you. If you are not going to be able to sing, you must know that a sickness gnaws at the depth of your spiritual being, or that life has filled your innocent soul with sins. And if you cannot rid yourself of these sins, you ought to step aside, leaving your place to those who can sing. Very interesting. All right. I'm going to cover the doctrine and then the 6 fundamental laws, and then we're going to dive right into some more action. So the Legion was an organization founded on order and discipline, guided by pure nationalism, stemming from the boundless love of a nation and country. The Legion wants to awaken all the creative energies of the nation to battle. The Legion defends the altars of the church that our enemies want to tear down. The Legion kneels before the crosses of the brave and the martyrs of the nation. The Legion stands as an unwavering shield around the throne from which commanders and kings have sacrificed themselves for the defense and exaltation of the fatherland. They wanted a legitimate ruler and wanted to support a king. The Legion wants to build a strong country, a new Romania, from strong souls and strong arms. And then they had 6 fundamental laws. The law of discipline, to be disciplined legionary, for only then will you win. The law of labor, work every day, and work with love. The law of silence, speak little, but speak what is necessary. The law of education, you must become another, a hero. The law of mutual aid, help your brother in distress. And the law of honor, walk only on the paths indicated by honor. So, as an expression of this, let's step back and look at some other things that Codreanu had been up to for some time, along with this core group. They conceived of basically work camps or labor camps that were a volunteer thing for these students and the student movement that was growing. So in 1924, back when they were in Iași, they were no longer able to meet in university buildings or their dormitories. They were being shut out by the Reds and the conservatives. So the nationalist students determined to build their own headquarters in Iași. They developed a brickyard on donated land in Ungeni along the Pruth River. And to supplement donations that they received from the public, a group of students, while these people are working in the brickyard, also worked a 2-acre garden plot that they were given for food. So in this way, the student of all social classes, even if they're upper class, even if they're upper middle class, they learn the value of manual labor. It also gives them great capabilities. As well, the peasants and workers around them saw the students laboring, saw these future elites, and saw them as being on their level. They not only respected them, but knew that they were genuinely, on the same level in terms of what they, getting in the dirt, getting messy. So the picture at right is the Christian cultural home of Iași that was completed in 1925, built from the bricks that the students made themselves in a brickyard that they developed themselves with their own hands. And then they built the Christian cultural home with those bricks. Subsequently, the Legion followed this method, built their own barracks and facilities.
See, we can't do that here. We got to elect the right people.
Exactly.
We just
exactly.
got to elect the right people, because
this is a fundamental step back at we have to create entirely parallel institutions. That was Codreanu's position, that the voting nonsense couldn't. There was a time when that could do something, but it wasn't time for that yet. So if they were denied access to the things that everyone else got, they would build their own.
You can't vote anything into existence unless the only people who are voting are your people.
Exactly.
Even if you have you can only have slight differences. You can't have people who are completely at odds one with another, worldviews at odds, and expect to vote your way out of anything.
Yeah. So a very interesting thing exactly to that point is that Codreanu, I mean, this man was a genius, and he understood people, and he clearly deeply felt what basically the life that he was living. And so even before it was like the Legion, this was something that he did going back to those student days. He always credited people for their financial contributions in their publications, and he would publish letters from these contributors and well-wishers. And it wasn't just to give them credit, but it was also so that readers could see that here are other people that feel the same way I feel. He also punished the misdeeds of people in his organizations, even if there were misdeeds against enemies. He tells a story about some legionaries who went into a Jewish-owned restaurant, who ate food and then refused to pay and walked out. And he made them work to pay off their basically punish them for their debt. He's like, look, what you're doing is you're worse than the person that you're ripping off, because you're debasing yourself through sin. So you can say, oh, well, this guy's a sinner, but so are you. Like what you're doing here is a sin. Once the punishment is fulfilled, once you've made good on your error, you're free of its burden, as if nothing has happened. It's forgiveness of sin through punishment, productive punishment. It isn't like whipping or anything. It's him doing labor. And then the other thing too that I kind of jumped around, and we'll look at some examples of this. The very bottom bullet point is that something that, again, learning to build these structures, etc. They took on local improvement projects, and so there were work centers all over the country that we'll see in detail here. And it really exploded as the Legion built up, and they would do irrigation in rural areas. They would repair bridges, upgrade roads, build fencing for peasants, for their animals, tend to the homes of the elderly and widows, tend to cemeteries and abandoned graves, just to show respect to people and to take care of their people. In 1929, November, they toured Romania. They said, we've had a couple of years of building this organization. It's time to go to the masses and not only spread the Legion. So, but Codreanu would go out and be introduced by the local head of the Legion to the people. The people would be wanting to go see the famed Codreanu that they've heard about for so long. And Codreanu, even though he was like the leader unquestioningly of the whole Legion, he would defer to the local Legion leaders who would present him to the people. It's really fascinating stories around that. And then the other thing too, they have all these lawyers, so they're volunteering to defend persecuted Romanians in court proceedings, whether they're part of their crew or whether they're just poor people who are, in a tight spot. So this is how they spread their not only their program, even though there was no program, right? It wasn't a political program. It was a cultural program. These are cool pictures. I was really happy to find high quality versions, a high quality version of this map here. So the Iron Guard completed construction of its greenhouse headquarters on the left, again with bricks from that brickyard. The building is still there in Bucharest in 1934. This became the headquarters for the whole country for the organization. The map at the top right shows over 300 settlements can be counted on this map, the fruit of the work of the legionary camps. So they built cathedrals, churches, they restored monasteries, hermitages, built dormitories, built shelters for the poor, built rest houses for the needy, improved mountain roads, built dams and bridges or fixed them. They built hospitals or restored hospitals for the poor, developed canteens for orphans, and many other kind of public works. The coolest one is the Cathedral of the Archangels Michael and Gabriel that still stands, as you can see from this photo, in Orastie. I don't know how to pronounce Romanian words. This was like one of their final big works. The cornerstone was laid in 1936 and completed in 1940. So here's this organization where the whole thing is just work. There's not an awful lot of politics that are involved in this. We'll talk about the national level politics and wrangling taking place shortly, but the average person isn't engaged. Average legionnaire is not engaging in politics. They're working to build things to improve the lives of people around them. That's really their commitment. So this church, the founder of this was Ion Mota, who was Jan Mota's father. The elder, was a prominent figure in Romania during the interwar period. He founded the newspaper Libertatea, and he was, again, the father of Ionel Mota, who was one of the founding members of the legionary movement. So the very first Holy Mass that was celebrated at this church was the funeral of Ion Mota on November 23rd, 1940. So the elder Motas passed away before the first Holy Mass could take place in the cathedral here. He died of natural causes. I was almost shocked. But they had very hardcore dignitaries come out from all over the kind of the Axis world to this Holy Mass and funeral. So, as I'm about to get into a timeline of the Legion / Iron Guard in the 1930s, and we have to talk about King Karl II. So King Karl reigned from June 1930 to September 1940. His succession rights were removed by his father, King Ferdinand I, in 1925 due to his trifling behavior, his very dishonorable behavior. He was a total womanizer and just a scumbag, hated by the Romanian people. So he was exiled to France. His father passed away. And then because of the kind of stacking political crises, he was returned to Romania in 1930 and reinstated via a coup over his son, Michael I, who was under a regency. So basically, just like in Spain in the 19th century, where they essentially have a corrupt libtard regency that caused the Carlist succession crisis. This was essentially what happened in Romania in this time. So in 1940, he was forced to abdicate by Prime Minister General Ion Antonescu, who was one of Germany's greatest allies. Stanley Payne, again, describes King Carol II as the most cynical, corrupt, and power-hungry monarch who ever disgraced a throne anywhere in 20th century Europe. So that sets the stage for what we're going to cover now. So, the 1930s, acceleration. So in the year 1937, someone dubs the Legion of the Archangel Michael the Iron Guard as an alternative name for them. There's various stories. Some of them are that it's like the militant groups of them would be the Iron Guard, but it became just kind of a shorthand for the overall organization. As King Carol II is enthroned, Codreanu makes a direct patriotic appeal to him, saying, "We're not opposed to you. We're trying to improve Romania. Why don't we find ways to work together?" Kind of like, please stop oppressing us also, right? So right out of the gate, King Carol II, consolidating power, sidelines democratic institutions as much as he can. So, if we remember in the way that their legislature and the kingship governed, he has his council of regents right below him. There's a lot of push-pull, and under Carol, he's just like grabbing as much power as he can and taking as much away from the democratic institutions as possible. And it plays out in a really interesting way, which we'll get into here in a second. In 1930, Codreanu was put on trial for conspiracy to commit murder because a kid who Codreanu will not allow into the Legion because he seems off murders someone in politics. And Codreanu has nothing to do with it, but because this kid had Legion materials with him, there's a claim that Codreanu was involved in this. He wasn't. He's acquitted. Again, after spending like 2 months in these hell prisons in Romania. In 1931, Carol II appoints one of A.C. Cuza's associates, Nicolae Iorga, as the premier, the prime minister. He's creating a coalition government that is kind of that gives some power to like the national liberals and then some power to the right wingers. He wants to strike this balance. And part of that is in terms not only for domestic policy, but also what's going on in Europe as things are starting to catch fire in the rest of Europe. They outlaw the Legion in January 1931 because it's seen as a direct challenge to the government. The leadership is rounded up and arrested for conspiracy to overthrow the government, even though there's absolutely no conspiracy whatsoever. They're acquitted. Well, they're retried because, again, the point of arresting them and putting them on trial is to get rid of them. They're acquitted in March. So, again, several months in these hell prisons. And Codreanu decides that it's time to take advantage of an open slot in Parliament and runs for parliament and is elected later that year. So in 1932, the Jorge government again dissolves the guard. So before they had been decreed outlawed and there was a roundup of the leadership, but it wasn't like really proactively going out and shutting them down. In 1932, they go out and like padlock their print shops and headquarters all around the country, and there's pretty brutal repression of them. Despite this, members of the guard run in a newly conceived political party that is basically the guard's party, and they win 5 seats in parliament under a national peasants government, which is kind of a agrarian right-wing coalition. So they continue to grow. They continue to organize, even though they're technically outlawed and being oppressed. There's one of the work camps, a legionary dam project at Vasani, is attacked by the police, and they're like cracking heads. And as word gets out about this, like the Romanians fall in to support the Legion, and the hatred of the government grows like crazy. The prime minister, a new prime minister is put in place from the National Liberal Party, again, because there's this constant shuffle in the 1930s under King Karl II. This PM, Jan Duca, is assassinated by some legionaries because of what they're up to. 1934 to 1937, Codreanu's political party, which is called Everything for the Country, continues to grow until it's the third largest political party in all of Romania. It's like 15.6 to 16% of the electorate falls into this bucket, with another like 60 to 70% of the country being super sympathetic to their positions, but wanting to do things strictly through the electoral process. So King Karl II appoints another prime minister, George Tatarescu, and what he's doing is he's playing the National Liberal and National Peasant parties against the Legion. So the top 2 political parties are being played against the Legion and in support of his own, again, authoritarian rule. So these elections are almost just like placeholders for people to talk about what their positions are, to pitch their programs, but they don't have very much actual governing power. It's largely theatrical. Codreanu's book, For My Legionaries, must read, download it or buy it, is published in 1936. And then in 1936, the Legion sends 8 volunteers, including Ion Mota, who's one of the founders and one of their thought leaders, Vasily Marin, to Spain. They present a Toledo sword to the general who led the defense of the Alcazar, and immediately go into fighting. And in January 1937, Mota and Marin are killed on the Madrid front.
Let me share something.
Okay, go for it.
Thomas posted this up this morning. This is a picture of the Romanian Iron Guard, and I think under it, it'll say that Mota is the second from the left. And
yes.
This is Marin right here.
Marin, yes.
This is a serious bunch of guys.
Very serious. All of their pictures are very serious.
Yeah.
So this is a big deal. And I would say not only was it a big deal for their martyrdom in the Spanish Civil War, not only was it a big deal in Romania, but it became huge in the kind of international kind of fascist alliance that was building. Not only was this a direct tie from Romania to really before World War II and the formalization of like the Axis powers being defined, but they were engaging with one another at this point. So Mota had been in Vacaresti prison with Codreanu in 1923. There were some. He's one of his oldest friends. He was like the second in command. He was the deputy captain of the Iron Guard. And then again, his own father was a famed nationalist Orthodox priest, and he was married to Codreanu's sister Iridenta. So Vasily Marin is interesting. I have a quote from him to close this out. But he was a member of the National Peasants Party until 1932. And then when he was in law school, he oriented towards Codreanu, lawyer, politician, and then I wrote thinking mans because he was a very sophisticated, analytical guy. His writings are really interesting. There aren't tons of them that I was able to find translated online, but he's very interesting. So after their martyrdom, Thomas has talked about this a lot. They basically their coffins toured Romania and would have, unlike George Floyd, cool people went out to see them. And it was a huge, huge deal.
Well, it actually goes beyond that. Their bodies were put on a train and sent home, and every country that they went through, partisans would come out and they would throw up Romans at the train. Women would, kneel.
Yeah, they were definitely seen as martyrs for the defense of Christendom in Europe, and a core of hardcore members of the Legion was dubbed the Mota Marine Corps, and the name or their motto was "Ready to Die." So, what I want to point out is that when you read libtard and enemy framing on the Iron Guard, they talk about how it's morbid and almost like suicidal. It's like, no, it's practical. They point out that you're fighting for a world that you may not see, and there's a strong likelihood that you will have to sacrifice, not only sacrifice along the way, but also sacrifice your life so that your children and your children's children will have a better life. And that's like fundamental to really Christian thought. It's not like, bedazzled jeans guitar playing, Christian youth pastor thought, but it's like real Christian thought. So an acceptance and an understanding of sacrifice totally makes sense. You see the same thing with the nationalists in the Spanish Civil War. They're not morbid. They're joyful. They're ready to do what needs to be done. So it's just one of these insane things. There's also these allegations of certain rituals that I just don't trust as being real because of who reports on them. Maybe some of them, there's supposedly there's blood brother rituals, which might be real, but then there's certain angles of them that just sound totally fantastic. I don't know, maybe some things happened later after Codreanu died, but I'm skeptical. So So things really shift at this point because the Guard becomes absolutely massive. It becomes a juggernaut that can't be controlled by King Karl II, who himself is out of control. So in 1937, the universities are closed down by this premier Tatarescu because they're totally out of control. Because of the nationalists are so ascendant at this point. So they just say, "Oh, well, we're going to shut this down because then they can't organize." There's another election in December 1937. King Karl blocks, while the coalitions are being built, he blocks the Guard, who's in third place for total seats, from participating in the government, and he appoints Octavian Goga from the fourth place National Christian Party, which is Kuza's party, as prime minister. Again, here's your right wing red meat, but we're not going to let you guys in because, again, he saw them as a threat, and a lot of it, frankly, was because of the I could say cult of personality about Codreanu, but really his sheer force of personality is a better way to put it. So the intent was to shift things right, to co-opt to the Iron Guard's popularity. So in 1938, King Karl II imposes a new constitution on Romania, which proclaims Romania a one-party state, which outlaws all these other parties. Codreanu and the Legion leadership are arrested and tried on very shaky grounds. First, Codreanu was arrested and tried for libel because of comments he made about, I think, Goga. I don't have it handy. That doesn't really go anywhere. And then he and his whole crew, his leadership, are tried for sedition. General Ion Antonescu, who's the defense minister at this point, and his name comes up again soon, resigns in protest on March 30th because he sees King Karl II as totally out of control. Codreanu is sentenced to 10 years of hard labor in the salt mines. He urges the Legion to refrain from violence. And then in November of 1938, Codreanu and 13 other legionaries who were in prison are murdered extrajudicially. The Legion chimps out and just like goes off and starts assassinating people like crazy. Codreanu becomes a martyr. Now, here's the thing. You'll notice that Codreanu all along the line urges like a refrain from violence, kind of, unless he's participating in it, and he'll only participate in it if it's going to actually accomplish something. And is done in this with this vision for like the future, because he's seen that his own participation in violence in the past didn't necessarily move the needle. He sees the Legion as what it is, which is, you know, they kind of captured the heart of the country at this point. And so he's trying to guide them in this way. With him gone and with Mota gone, like, you have these guys who are in charge who are like totally going nuts. So there was a reporter named R.G. Waldeck, a female reporter who was present in Romania in 1940 to 1941. And she said that the violent killing of Codreanu only served to cement his popularity and arouse interest in his cause. So she wrote, to Romanian people, the captain remained a saint and a martyr and the apostle of a better Romania. So this did not have the cooling effect that King Karl II thought it would have. Basically, by 1940, King Karl is forced to abdicate by the fine fellow that we see here, Antonescu. The government is totally illegitimate at this point, and so in June 1940, the Legion enters the Romanian government, and 3 legionaries are in the cabinet of Ion Gigurtu by July. Again, the shuffling of all these different political parties in the cabinet is at its end. World War II is on. The Soviet Union occupies Bessarabia and northern Bukovina, which are those, recent acquisitions up in the north and northeast. It's Ukrainian territory that's still, I believe, is still, majority Hungarian, but in Ukraine today, the Ukraine, I should say. And the National Legionary State is proclaimed September 1940. Like I said, King Karl II was forced to abdicate, and the Legion, or the Iron Guard, was the only recognized political movement left in Romania. But immediately there are struggles because the Legion wants to completely just go nuts and take over, whereas Antonescu is trying to keep them calmed down and exercise power instead of getting revenge quite yet, right? He doesn't think it's time for revenge. Antonescu, being the best ally, basically, of the Germans, allows German troops to enter Romania October 1940. Again, it's important for them to do so because they'll be able to defend Romania against the Soviet Union at this point. In November, Romania joins the Axis. The Legion, like I said, began to go nuts. And at this point, there's a bunch of imprisoned members of previous governments who are in that Veresti prison where Codreanu had been in before. And Legion officials go in and just execute all of them. And then they start killing their enemies on the street for revenge. And Antonescu is trying to get them to see into the future and beyond, lashing out at this point, and is not very successful at it. Under Antonescu, as part of policy of the Romanian government, as was desired by something like 70% of those in power in the old legislature, they began official expropriations of Jewish property, under which excesses take place. They're barred from owning rural property, forests, and river transport companies, interestingly. And during these expropriations, there's all kinds of issues. And in fact, this is where that whole correlation between, the Yad Vashem stories as to what Germany was involved in, or official, Holocaust stuff, a huge amount of it was Romanians doing this stuff, and the Romanian state, as well as just partisans, frankly. So the Legion is so out of control at this by January 1941 that Antonescu attempts to suppress their growing authority. He's been replacing people in cabinets with army loyalists. There's a Legion rebellion. Not everybody participates in it, but the upper tiers of the Legion go off. There's a description of a pogrom in Bucharest that is purportedly carried out by the Legion at this time, and again, it's described as the Legion doing it, but per my reading, it's a relatively small portion of the Legion. But it gets the Legion crushed. Like 9,000 legionnaires are arrested and I believe executed over the next couple months. The vast majority bend the knee, and excuse me, hundreds were killed, thousands were arrested. Like 9,000 ended up spending a lot of time in prison, and surviving leadership fled Romania. So again, when you read the official story, the end of the National Legionary State in 1941 is really just consolidation under under Antonescu. The vast majority of the Legion bends the knee and doesn't fight it out with the government. And then kind of the rest is history. It becomes Romania, World War II.
Well,
classic story.
I don't think Thomas and I have talked about this on the show, but we've definitely talked about it privately. I'm not going to get deep into it because he's the better one to talk about it. But he said that this even caused rifts between Hitler and the SS and members of the SS, because Hitler was 100. Yeah, Hitler was 100% behind Antonescu, and there were people in the SS who were 100% behind the Guard, and were actually working to subvert Antonescu by helping the Guard. And yeah, that's Thomas needs to do an episode about that.
It's very interesting, and he knows the goings on on the German side far better than I could hope to express. But long story short, my assertion is that without Codreanu, the Legion, the Iron Guard, wasn't a thing anymore. It wasn't a power. It couldn't be a power. Codreanu was the animating spirit that gave it that elevated state. Well, but I'll also point out that yes, just the level of oppression that they were under, like of course they would react that way. Of course, because King Karl II was not a legitimate leader, and that their government had not been legitimate, if it had ever been legitimate, for a very long time. And the people of Romania didn't see them as legitimate, which is why they supported Antonescu. And, so a very strange balancing act. Everyone always saw the Legion, and Codreanu in particular, as a threat to the government, even when they were supporting the people in what everyone said that they wanted, whether or not they were ready for it. So it's just one of these tragedies. And I feel comfortable wrapping up my presentation here with Vasily Marin's quote here describing the Legion. And I see it kind of as their legacy, and really what we should think about. It's really quite motivating, because it's not, like I said before, it's not the way that they're described in the Wikipedia 3-paragraph summary. So Marin states, quote, "Soaked in dynamism, our movement is revolutionary. The Legion promotes the creative spirit in all the fields of public life and sincerely rejects conservatism. The Legion organizes the conquest of the future with the help of all the productive categories of the nation and does not represent a reaction toward the past." El fin.
Well, I think it's safe to say that Codreanu was not only a leader, but he was a spiritual leader. And once he was gone, there was no one there to preach that message, to preach it from that side. where now you just had it was about violence and it was about force, and the spiritual was gone.
I what I would say is that given the size of the Legion by the time he was dead, though, that it would have been much worse. It could have easily been much worse in terms of just like misguided chimp outs. But the core group that participated in that, was fairly easily crushed because it wasn't huge. It'd be really interesting to have more information on that. But I agree with you. Like he was this was a spiritual movement. It wasn't just a political operation. They weren't doing a politics. They weren't doing an economics. They were living, and they were living their platform. They were living their program, and just had a fundamentally different view than the way we think about political parties and political movements. And I think that's really important. Stripping away some of the activities and some of the allegations about them. If you look at what they actually did, it was very, very positive and productive. And there was a stamp published in Romania for the 50th anniversary of the deaths of Mota and Marin under communism, which is wild. The Romanian people, say what you will about what Romania is right now. I'm certainly no expert on it. I've never been there. I don't speak Romanian. But like you go on Romanian websites and or look at videos online from the kind of the legionary state period. There's a bunch of German filmed color videos of Antonescu and some legionnaires speaking, and it's really interesting that just the massive number of people that turn out for these things, and the comments are filled with comments in Romanian that are in support of this, overwhelmingly, almost no opposition to it. So it's really interesting. Even the academic papers that you'll see, that are in Romanian are, you run it through a translator and you're like, oh, this is relatively neutral, talking about, really spending a lot of time talking about the problems with King Karl and the government and all that. And, people genuinely supported these guys because they supported the people, and they were doing something totally different.
All right. Promote away. Go ahead, Karl.
Thanks, Pete. Another classic Karl Dahl appearance on the Pete Quinones show. 2 hours.
So humble.
You can find more of my stuff, including my effort posts, on Substack, karldahl.substack.com. That's KarlDahl.substack.com. I have 2 novels on Amazon. That's the best way to support me. It's the only way to give me monies is to buy book. My most recent is Faction with the Crusaders, which is a nationalist sympathetic tale from the period of the Spanish Civil War.
75 pages in.
Nice.
I just couldn't believe how you started that. It was like, oh, just throw me right into the middle of something. Thank you.
Got your attention.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete.
Finally getting around to read it. I apologize. I read a lot. So
I know you read a lot. Believe me, I do.
All right, man. Until the next time. Muslim.
Thanks, Pete.